In part 3 of this series, we examined how long-buried anti-Semitic narratives from World War II are being quietly resurrected in our own time. We looked at how high-profile influencers, figures like Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly, have, whether intentionally or not, given exposure to voices such as historical revisionist Daryl Cooper.
Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there.
And that is the pseudo-historian that Tucker Carlson has said is the best and most honest historian in America.
This claim by Cooper is a blatant distortion of well-documented history. The Holocaust was not the result of bureaucratic neglect or logistical oversight. It was a deliberate, systematic genocide planned and executed by the Nazi regime. Extensive documentary evidence, survivor testimony, Nazi records, and post-war trials conclusively demonstrate that mass starvation, forced labor, ghettos, and extermination camps were intentional instruments of murder, not accidental consequences of war. To suggest otherwise is not historical revision. It is denial masquerading as analysis. These narratives are not new. They are the same poisonous tropes that took root before the Second World War and ultimately helped justify the persecution and murder of millions of Jews across Europe. Those ideas did not emerge in a vacuum. They were cultivated, tolerated, and in some cases enabled by institutions that should have stood firmly against them. In this episode, Part 4, we turn our attention to one of the most controversial and consequential questions of the war: the role of the Vatican, and specifically Pope Pius XII, during the rise and reign of the Third Reich. Using documented historical evidence, we will examine allegations of secret dealings between the Vatican and Nazi Germany, what was known, what was said, and what was left unsaid. We'll draw from a revealing PBS interview with historian David Kertzer, author of The Pope at War, as well as the work and testimony of John Cornwell, author of Hitler's Pope, whose research challenges long-held assumptions about Vatican neutrality during World War II. This is not an exercise in assigning blame for its own sake. It is an effort to confront history honestly, because when truth is obscured or rewritten, the same deceptions are free to return under new names and new platforms. And as people of faith, we must ask not only what happened, but what lessons must still be learned.
A series of recently opened Vatican archives are shedding new light on the relationship between Pope Pius XII and Adolf Hitler as he led Nazi Germany during World War II. Amna Nawaz looks at what we are learning and how it changes our thinking about the Vatican during that time.
Judy, in 2020, the Vatican released millions of documents on Pope Pius XII that were previously hidden from public view. These include transcripts of negotiations between the Pope and Nazis. A new book published today takes a deeper look at these revelations. Historian David Kertzer is the author of that book. It's called The Pope at War: The Secret History of Pius XII, Mussolini, and Hitler. No previous versions of history around Pius XII went one of two ways, right? He was either called Hitler's Pope and an anti-Semite, or the story was that he did everything in his power to save as many Jewish people as he could during the war. After reviewing the documents, what's your understanding?
Well, I think neither one is really accurate. They're both extremes. The fact is, Pius XII was afraid, certainly in the first years of the war, that the Nazis were going to win. And so he felt he had to plan for a Europe that was going to be under Nazi control with their pal Mussolini helping out.
Historian David Kertzer notes that Pope Pius XII viewed Adolf Hitler not merely as a political leader, but as a potential world ruler, one whose power could not be ignored. Convinced that the Vatican's survival and influence depended on accommodation, Pius XII pursued secret diplomatic dealings with the Nazi regime, prioritizing institutional preservation over public moral confrontation. Building on this historical backdrop, another leading Vatican historian takes the analysis even further. Speaking before an audience at the University of Texas, Journalist and author John Cornwell addresses the moral paradox at the center of Pope Pius XII's legacy, one that challenges long-held assumptions about neutrality, resistance, and complicity.
It is within this context that I made so bold in my book as to suggest that the future Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, despite the fact that he appeared to stand morally aloof from the Nazis and detested Hitler and did much to help Jews during the war, was nevertheless Hitler's Pope in that his dealings, concessions, accommodations with Hitler were far more damaging than had he been a card-carrying Nazi bishop.
What makes this moment so dangerous is not merely the repetition of history, but the way false narratives are being laundered through voices that claim authority, faith, or intellectual honesty. John Cornwell's research for his book exposes how deeply anti-Semitic tropes were embedded long before the Holocaust, and how they were framed as a defense of Christian civilization itself. Speaking about Eugenio Pacelli, the future Pope Pius XII, Cornwell notes that Pacelli repeatedly emphasized what he called the Jewishness of political movements he opposed. This rhetoric aligned with a growing belief in Germany that Jews were responsible for the Bolshevik Revolution, and that, in Cornwell's words, their principal aim was the destruction of Christian civilization. That accusation, false then and false now, is precisely the kind of language being resurrected today by revisionists like Darryl Cooper and overt ideologues like Nick Fuentes. When influencers such as Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, and Megyn Kelly give these individuals a platform and fail to rigorously challenge these claims, they unintentionally legitimize narratives that history has already proven deadly. These ideas did not merely coexist with the Holocaust, they helped justify it. And today, those same distortions are being repackaged for a new audience, particularly within segments of the Christian right, where they are used to argue that Jews are the problem and that true Christians should reject the state of Israel, even as an ally in the Middle East. History shows us where this thinking leads. Cornwell's work reminds us that anti-Semitism cloaked in religious language is not theological discernment. It is a dangerous lie with catastrophic consequences. So the question we must ask is this: what does the rise of anti-Semitism worldwide have to do with end times prophecy? Jesus himself addressed this in Matthew 24, warning that Israel would be hated by all nations. We read in Matthew 24, verse 7 through 9, speaking to the Jewish disciples and ultimately to the nation of Israel during the last days. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Not some nations, not most nations, all nations. That hatred would not merely be political, it would be spiritual, ideological, and relentless. The prophet Zechariah echoes this in Zechariah 12 verses 2 and 3, declaring that Israel would become a burdensome stone and that all nations would gather against her. God, speaking through the prophet, states that, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it." What we are witnessing today, this renewed hostility toward the Jewish people, cloaked in moral language and revisionist history, is not new. It is prophetic, and it is accelerating. In the next part of this series, we will look more closely at the documented deals made between Adolf Hitler and Pope Pius XII, and how those arrangements, combined with silence and moral compromise, ultimately facilitated the Holocaust. This was not true Christianity at work, but a failure within the Catholic Church's hierarchy, where a blind eye was turned while evil advanced. True Christianity confronts lies. It defends truth, and it refuses to rewrite history, especially when the cost of forgetting has already been measured in millions of lives. Stay with us on the Gospel Vault at our Faith versus Indoctrination playlist for Part 5 in this series. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more as we examine today's headlines through the lens of Scripture. Check out all of our playlists for more great messages in uplifting praise and worship music. For evangelist Dave Jacobs and the Gospel Vault, thank you, and God bless, my friends.
He looked beyond the cross and saw